Delighted to be here. And yes, yesterday was a really awesome and a sweet day, bittersweet. But it was an honor to have facilitated the service. And Jeanie and her family had written some things to say, from their point of view. And when she gave me that, it was just like, well, okay, let's see what else we're supposed to do. And it was just so clear. It's like, do the Aramaic Lord's Prayer. And so I ran that by Jeanie. Is that okay with you? And she says, of course. So it just all fit really sweetly. We ended the service.
So you spoke it in Aramaic?
Yes, I did. I explained it a little bit. I explained the Set a Trap for God, and then did the English, not translation, but how would it translate for today's world? So I shared that with them, and then I invited them to join Yeshua and Dad by the Sea of Galilee and imagine, close your eyes. We talked about the passages in John where Yeshua precedes his conversation about what they call the Lord's Prayer with, be quiet, go into the silence. You're going to do alms, be quiet, don't tell anybody. You've got to go into the silence. You got to do it, and then, his explanation of don't be like the loudmouths who go out there and have to have everybody hear them do their prayer, get quiet. And so it just, sort of all fit together to go, okay, so now let's go into the silence and let's imagine being transported to the Sea of Galilee. And there's Dad standing beside Yeshua, and let my voice fade and hear his voice speak. And I explained a little bit about how the Aramaic language is based in physics, not men's minds. And then we did it in Aramaic, and it's just a sweet space.
God, that's a gorgeous image.
It was a sweet space. So that was our day yesterday, and it was long, and it was intense, and getting quiet time. And actually tonight we're going to go treat ourselves to a quiet dinner just to unwind.
I bet. That's so good.
Got some blueberry bushes to plant from the farm. Been out running around this morning getting some amendments to make the soil more acidic for those bushes before we plant them, and so I consumed my morning, and this afternoon we're just going to get quiet and take care of ourselves.
Great. Well, thanks for doing the radio show in the middle of all that.
Well, this is our life. This is our conversation. It's the opportunity to speak it and go live it is deepens the experience. So this is where our commitment is. So what's happening in your world?
Well, you said 2 or 3 things. I can remember 2, but I know there was a third one about Michael. You told me the starfish story. And that was the clincher. We have felt so helpless about the situation in the world with homeless, not to mention climate change and, bipartisan and partisan arguments and ugliness and all sorts of things. We have felt rather, as if, well, where do we begin? We have to begin right where we are. You told that starfish story, and so Michael is our one starfish. So we had a talk with him. Oh, the second thing you said, it's a good idea. Tim Hayes had mentioned doing this, get Tim on the conversation, Tim Bingham. And Tim said, all right, well, I'll join you in discussing the situation. And between the two of us, we decided an arrangement whereby Michael could stay here indefinitely, provided he doesn't keep getting his Social Security insurance, which is an additional $300 above the $500 or $550 he gets for his regular Social Security. He is supposed to be fully homeless to warrant or deserve getting that second check. And he just got one of those checks, but he doesn't know if he's going to continue. So we have a little leeway if they stop the check because he is still living here, he will have to decide whether he wants to keep the check and move out or stay here and lose the check. If
Right.
he loses the check, it means that he has no income or very, very little. But he has a place to stay, and our deal with him is, I said, okay, you're going to be a tenant. That was another thing you said. You don't have to be buddies. He's a tenant. Just a little shift in how we look at him has helped us so much. So he's now a tenant, and I said, we don't have to, I mean, we haven't been talking. We don't have dialogues. And he said, well, I have nothing to say. That was his answer, is what can I say? And I you know, there are lots of things we could say together in a dialogue, but that doesn't seem to be on his mind or in his agenda at all right now. So he doesn't have anything to say. So we said, all right, you can come and go, we'll come and go, but we will going to ask you to pay rent to us in the form of labor, yard work, garden work, front and back, more serious vacuuming, not just a little slapdash around the edges, which has been great, but it hasn't really come up to my rather modest standard. I said, we won't ask you to clean bathrooms, but if you would wash the kitchen floor every couple of weeks. And he said, oh, I can do all those things. And I said, I'll make you a list. And I did, and he has the list. And I said, and we would be freed up to go away. We want to visit my daughter, and we wouldn't have to hire a house sitter. We want you to get acquainted with our animals and be able to live upstairs maybe, not in, we haven't worked that out. We don't want him in the bedroom. That was Tim's thing. But to know the habits of the kitties so he can take care of them. And I said, and you train us about taking care of your dogs so you'd be freer to go out and do gigs, and he doesn't want to do that. So that's one of the resistances, is he feels he has to have the dog with him. So going on a gig means bringing all this equipment, amplifiers, microphones, instruments, and the dog in a carriage, and that's a deterrent for a man of 68. He has a bad back, and he says, that's one of the reasons I don't have gigs, is it's just too much trouble. If it's raining out, I'll cancel and all this stuff. And so we're up against an interesting situation. But at the moment, he says, well, I feel safe here. I just feel safe here. And that's his goal, I think, is to feel safe. And I said, well, I hope it'll sort of stiff up your self-esteem if you're earning that by doing stuff in the house. It would certainly help us. It's a good arrangement all around. And he said, oh, yes, you know, and maybe now that the weather's warm, I'll feel like going out and getting some jobs. We're still up in the air, but we've got some space. If he doesn't get a check, he'll stay here indefinitely, I guess. And if he does get a check, he'll decide, do I want the check or do I want to stay here without the check? So, and you had also made another suggestion that you sent me in a text, and I don't remember it. I could look it up. But in any case, whatever you said pushed the logs out of the way for a period of time, and I wanted to thank you for that, because we've been kind of stuck.
Well, that's awesome. Delighted. Glad to be here of support. Two things. I mean, in terms of what you raised, would you like to go into the arena of dealing with him, or would you like to go into the arena of the opportunities it's giving you to come out of denial?
Oh, well, coming out of denial would be a good thing. What did I do? I don't even know what I did.
Well, it's not what you did, but your words indicate that there's still some denial when you say, you remember our definition of denial, when I think or speak as though something outside of me is the cause of what's moving in me. I'm in denial, and to do that, I have to dissociate from something. And whenever I dissociate from something, there's going to be some form of trauma or pain. That's why I'm dissociating from it. So notice that you spoke about you were helpless in dealing with him. and I don't remember. You could go back and re-listen to get the exact words, but it was pretty clear that what was moving in you in the way of helplessness was about him. And my offering would be, no, this is your opportunity to heal some helplessness, to forgive that helpless energy. And a good question to ask yourself is, how does it look like in my life? How often in my life do I set things up so that I get to experience this? My thought disorders that produce this feeling that I call helplessness. Of course, helplessness is more of a thought than a feeling, but it sort of ties together.
Well, I'm drawing deep breaths because, of course, you're right on, because our whole second issue is grandson in the middle, my middle grandson, Jacob, who is belligerently expecting money from us, and I don't. Tim Hayes said a wonderful thing at the very end of his hour. He said, do we want, if I can dredge up in my memory what exactly he said, something like, let us all see ourselves as participants in this process rather than victims. And my grandson sees himself as a victim of everything, the world, the economy, his stingy grandparents, and he sees himself as a victim. And I'm seeing him see himself this way, and I feel completely hogtied, helpless. So, yeah.
So how often have you seen yourself as a victim? That might be a good worksheet topic for you. And or how often have you found yourself being guilty or afraid or hogtied over someone else's predicament as though it's quote unquote your fault, which of course it sounds like he's doing his best to make you know that it's your fault. And of course,
definitely.
I would certainly I'd come on that conversation totally from the other end. Excuse me, kid, you're getting school, you're getting a house, you're getting your car, we've been paying for your cat food and probably your weed. What are you talking about? We're stingy. Like, I'll show you what stingy is. That would tend to be mine, and that would be my issue. But it would be just like, well, if you don't appreciate it, then I think we can just let it go and, do what you need to do.
God, Michael, this is
that thing of being to blame.
Yeah. I see a MindShifter in here. Can you form one? Because if you don't, I'm going to, but it's in very rough form at the moment.
Well, what's the rough form you have for it?
It's safe and healing for me to take a stand without guilt and do what I know is right within myself.
Perfect. I'd add one word to it.
Okay.
Before the word stand, I'd put the word unpopular.
Oh.
Because you are going to be even less popular if you take that stand than if you keep, and I suspect that he knows how to keep pushing your buttons so that you don't take that stand.
Michael, this is just so ironic. I am the only person who is still talking to him. His mother has blocked him because he's so belligerent. His father barely talks to him, and when he does, it's because his father wants some kind of reassurance that he's a good dad. It comes back to him. And my thing has been to hold a loving space. And I guess I've misinterpreted that in some ways. I have held a loving space and done my breathing. Yesterday I was at the dentist and they took out a big tooth. And I was lying there, tense, with a jackhammer in my mouth. And I thought, take a breath, let it go, let them do their job, just relax, let it go. And I was able to relax for moments at a time, and then I'd find I was all tensed up again. It wasn't so bad. Having a tooth pulled is like nothing compared to worrying about my grandson. I was comparing the two. I could take 2 teeth out, or 20, compared to how I fuss over my grandson, and I have fussed over Michael downstairs. So what is this? And it goes back, I'm rambling. What? Go ahead.
No, you're right on track. You're in process.
When
and
my
it sounds
son-in-law, first got to know us, he told my daughter that I was an untrustworthy bitch. And since he was such a bright, attractive person, I believed him. I thought, God, he sees something that I am not sure I knew was there. He must be right. And it took a long time to come around to the idea that it was his problem, not mine. It's still going on. It's still going on with Jacob. And anyway, what were you going to say?
Recognize that it's classic with alcoholics. They, as I said yesterday, they bring everybody out. So it sounds like he's rung everybody out but you. And he's on the verge of you saying, no, I'm rung out, that's enough. And what usually happens with family members and friends and such is they just disappear. That's pretty classic and standard until the alcoholic or the drug addict is alone, hopeless and helpless, and either destroys themselves by driving deeper into the drugs and alcohol, or wakes up and goes, I've alienated everybody. I'm here by myself. Maybe I have a problem. And, of course, if they happen to run into somebody who's in, say, the AA program or NA, they'll have somebody who'll reinforce that and stand as a space for their healing. But, holding a loving space doesn't mean you have to accept a baseball bat to your head. Cancel the thought.
I understand that, but I've been doing it. And he does like to talk to me, and he's civil with me most of the time. And he says, I'm the only person, you're the only person I can talk to. And I'm thinking he's buttering me up so he can keep this open. I have to stop it.
I would support you because, as I said yesterday, again, the longer it takes to learn the lesson, the tougher the lesson is. And certainly this would be a tough place to pull out. And a year from now or 2 years from now, 3 years from now, he'll be finished school, I suspect, unless when he finishes school, you follow through and go, I'm not taking your sob story anymore, you're on your own. But 3 years from now, if he's still hounding you and still, receiving from you and still dissing you for it and beating up on you for it, it'll be even tougher for him to learn the lesson he's going to learn. But, the alcoholic has to hit the bottom. And deceit is the mode of operation of the alcoholic mind. And, they can make up anything out of nothing and be pretty convincing about it. So my offering to you would be, holding that space of love, I think, is the biggest gift you can give him, but you're also allowed to hold that space from a distance. You don't have to stand there and be beat for it. Breathing?
Yeah, I'm trying to find a text where he, says, I know you guys are just watching for when I bottom out, and you're forcing me to bottom out and be homeless and suicidal. And you're setting this up for me. And I'm trying to not do that.
That's the classic alcoholic conversation. You're doing it to me. I have nothing to do with my life. I'm not responsible.
And
that's as classic as it gets.
He is sober. He insists that he's sober, and his girlfriend can testify. And I have no way of knowing whether he's sober or not.
Well, there is a thing called a dry drunk, and that is the alcoholic stops drinking, but it doesn't change the underlying personality games that are going on. Until that work is done, they'll still function as though they're an alcoholic, even if they're not drinking.
That's what's happening then. I said, look, I'll believe you if you say you're sober. Your mom says you're not. Your brother says you're not. We have no way of knowing. Perhaps you're sober. I want to trust you. So I'm going to dare to trust you, and let's go from here. So let's not talk about this anymore. But it's not. You're right. Whatever he's doing, he's still like a drunk.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's very helpful, Michael. It's horrible.
Yeah.
And Tim's readings are so wonderful. He's talking about we get this kind of challenge on the earth in order to grow, so we're ready to be free again. And we'll be all the freer when we drop the body and all this stuff. This is Kristen Sundberg's stuff. And I'm thinking one of the things you have to do throughout this is allow and observe, as you've taught us, and wish well, keep a loving space, do your own work, and otherwise you can't do anything. That's the helplessness. I cannot do anything for that boy.
Well, actually, you can. You can very clearly and actively hold the space of love and hold him accountable. That's the tough part, because he's going to pull out all the stops.
He does, and it's like being whipped and whipped and whipped and whipped, and I just hate it.
Well, then it sounds like it's time for you to speak up for yourself. My offering would be, perhaps one more warning, and that's it. It's like, here's the riot. Maybe even put it in a letter to him. Here's the riot act. You abuse, you cajole, you curse, and I'm just not going to take it anymore. I'm here to support you. I care for you, but I'm going to start loving you from a distance, and that means a distance from my bank account too. And you're going to have to do what you do, and you can blame me and scream at me and do all that, but I'm like everybody else in your life. I'm going to cut it off, because sooner or later you're going to have to wake up and take responsibility. And again, he may follow through with that commitment to do suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the risk that you run by allowing people to be responsible. It's kind of like, you think about how many people in this world blame God. Oh no, God took him. God did this. God did that. God. Why does God allow? It's like, no, you're given free will, and you get to do what you want. And God is always there for support and assistance when you're ready for it. But if you're not ready and you're going to keep playing the game on your own, then you keep playing the game on your own. And then you have to be responsible. And responsibility is a tough thing in this world. Tough thing. And if you read that riot act to him, I think you could do that very nicely in a letter, but very firmly. Hold him accountable. Mm-hmm. And then let him know that this is the last time I'm going to say this. And if you continue to violate me and my husband, then we're going to just step away, like everybody else has done. And maybe you'll get finally get the message that you're involved in your life, and this is about you. It's not about me. I've done enough, and I give. That's where I would tend to go with it, because it's not helping him just to keep feeding his addiction, whether he's doing alcohol or not. The other thing, the alcoholic's addicted to control.
Yeah.
Whether drinking or not.
The only chink in all of this is that I tell myself he is the way he is because he's been abused and he is mentally ill. How would I treat a mentally ill person? So you're saying don't treat him any differently than you would any other responsible person. Is that true?
Well, if I were in front of a mentally ill person, I would certainly do whatever I could to support them getting treatment for their mental illness. But if it means that while I'm doing that, they're beating up on me, there comes a point where I'd say, that's just not my job.
Okay. Well, he has a therapist, but he tells the therapist from his point of view, and his therapist says, whoa, you have such awful parents. Aren't they terrible? I mean, and he writes to me. He says, my therapist thinks you're monsters. I've told you this before.
Well,
It's hard to hear.
He needs a new therapist, because that therapist is probably playing some of the same games in their lives, if that's the advice he's offering.
Yeah. Right.
Difficult challenges. And, when you were talking earlier about Michael, it's isn't the same conversation, but it sort of is. It's been intertwined. When we talked about him being a tenant and, not really any communication or sharing things. And I haven't ever had this thought before, but one of the things that I think drives homelessness is self-imposed isolation. I don't want to have to deal with anybody. It's too painful. I mean, I bet if we could, dig into Michael's trauma and pain, it's horrific. And as you say with Jacob, it's horrific.
It is.
But if you allowed each person, and remember the power person dynamic under stress, the person who's been horrifically abused is going to be an horrific abuser. That's just pretty much classic, unless they've done their work.
Yeah.
And so at what level do you give over of yourself? And, there's that thing that happens when you get on an airplane. They say, put your mask on before you put your kid's mask on. Because if you're not there, you can't support that child. And if you, take yourself to the edge of destruction or trauma, then you render yourself unable to support.
That's true.
It's a big and a challenging call.
Michael, now that Michael downstairs is with us in this way, I'm going to suggest to him that I'm going to ask him if he'd be willing to come on the radio show, if you'd be willing to work with him. He was not available for that before, but wouldn't that be just the best if he could find some kind of a light at the end of this tunnel he's in?
I think my experience with homeless people is that there is no light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, that's the way it looks here.
I think that usually it's based in early abuse, but then the being out on the streets, there's a whole other level of abuse that happens.
Oh, yeah.
And what homeless people go through, I mean, we hear every once in a while, this guy was just, it was a couple of years ago, a guy beaten to death with a baseball bat just because he was homeless, and some, angry kid came across him, and that is, I've talked to a number of homeless people over the years, and it's a pretty abusive place to live. But if you can't face people, if you can't converse with people, if the trauma is so deep that it's tough.
Another thing we spoke about with him, and this wasn't a requirement, I said, I'm not a one to proselytize coming to church. I have much wider idea of spirituality that would require anyone to go to a church. But my church is loving and friendly. It's an instant community. You don't have to make friends with anybody, but they will be there for you, and they will see you. And you could do some gigs there. You could play at our little suppers that we have. You could come and just improvise. They'd love the sound of the guitar and you singing in the background. Why don't you think about that? And he said, I'll think about that. So we've got a little couple of ideas that might help.
Well, we'll hold the space that things might open for him.
But, then he might find out he can't get this check. And then if he can't get the check, we're not sure what he's going to do anyway. But this has been helpful just to, I guess I feel really responsible to really help somebody. And sometimes you said there's no light at the end of that tunnel. So we're just trying to protect somebody
for a
period of time, I guess you could say.
Well, I think that what's natural for us as humans is to want to be the light for the person who doesn't see or have any. And each individual, of course, has to set their own limit as to how much they're willing to take with someone who's returning abuse for support. Now,
so
all of a sudden, Jeanie, have you got your phone on?
Hang up and dial back in.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. So she said she was going to hang up and dial back in.
Yeah, but was your phone muted?
No,
because I started to hear that
yes,
fluttering noise that sometimes
comes
through. Okay.
Her phone was crackling and stuff.
Good. Okay. Well, wait a second while she dials back in.
There she is.
Yeah.
Let's see if it's better.
Yeah. You just went silent, and I guess it's my phone. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, I started to hear a fluttering sound. I think it was from your end, but. So I think that it's natural for us as human beings. That's what true humanity is, to want to be the light for someone that's in the darkness, and everybody has to set their own limit as to how much abuse they're willing to take, to retrieve someone who's been so abused that they don't know how to do anything but lash out. It takes a great deal of patience, and I noted at Heartland over the years, the whole idea when somebody was in trouble was, okay, so if you want to come be on the support team, there's food, there's housing, there's teaching. And I know that many times I extended myself far beyond what I should have. And on some few occasions, just called it and said, no more, that's it. And you're driving out of here now, or you're walking out of here now, or we're taking you to the bus depot now. I've done that maybe 3 times in 30 years. But it just came to the point of, I've reached my limit. I've extended everything I can extend, and it obviously isn't being reciprocated. So, and each person has, we hear of the miracle story of somebody who went right to the full extreme and was able to pull somebody back. It's, I think, up to each of us to determine where that line is for us.
Yeah.
So holding the space in both instances, and I do some worksheets around that, what's going on for me around that conversation with Michael with the next level, and healing helplessness.
Good thought.
Awesome. Well, let us know the results of that MindShifter. I think it's a good one.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Any other thoughts for you today?
No, they're gone. Thanks.
Well, we appreciate you, and we hold the space.
Thanks, Michael. You're welcome
All right,
back.
dear heart, blessings. All righty, thank
Daddy.
you.
Yeah.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. All right, Miss Jeanie. We've got about 18 or 19 minutes left, so we've got time for another great call. If anybody's out there and wants to have a conversation, let's go for it. Our call-in number, if you're on one of those stations, there you go. Or if you're on one of those stations where we can't see you, our call-in number is 563-999-3581. And if you call that number, you'll be listening to the show directly. So let's have a conversation. Once you're listening to the show, if you push 1, we're talking. So let's talk. Anybody out there in listening land have a thought for us? Question, thought, answer. Well, I had the thought today of talking a little bit, we're going into Easter week. And there's an interesting short piece from Course in Miracles on the whole idea of what the Christian world is celebrating as crucifixion this Friday. And I think one of the number one things that people need to do is recognize that the reason Yeshua set up what he set up. And people say, well, no, he didn't set that up. No, nobody would do that. Well, actually, if you read the passages where Peter tries to get in the way, he's going to save him. He's going to stop that from happening. Yeshua, in that case, addresses Peter directly as Satan. He says, stop it. Get out of my way. In essence, is what he says. Satan. And then he tells us what Satan is. And he says, for you think in the mind of man rather than the plan of God. in carbon-based memory and its limited ability to think. And so he purposely set up an experience to demonstrate, and refused to be quote-unquote saved from it, to demonstrate that the only thing that could impact us is that which we, on some level, energetically participated with. So he goes through that whole experience and comes out the other side unscathed. Chance to see it. There's a play called Cotton Patch Gospel. It's really quite good. And it's a story about the whole disciples and Yeshua, crucifixion, resurrection, the whole thing. Only it's set in modern-day southern Georgia. And so all the players are the natives of South Georgia. The one, and I don't remember a whole lot about it, it's been years since I saw it, but the one scene in it that really struck me, which I thought was quite hilarious and quite apropos, is when Yeshua resurrects and he first sees the disciples, he does kind of a twirl looking at his own structure, and he says, "Look, guys, it worked. I taught you this. I chose to demonstrate it, and it worked. If you don't buy into abuse, death, and suffering, if there's nothing in you to cooperate with it, then you cannot be killed, because the only thing that can kill you is that which is going on inside of you, truly kill you." And so his invitation is to be aware at every moment that you're actually functioning as a human being, actually functioning out of love rather than fear, because fear kills. Fear literally, medically kills. Fear is behind more of the world's diseases than we could possibly count up. The real disease is the disease of fear, not whatever the medicos call it, the ABC or the XYZ disease. And his whole experience, obviously Peter's in fear, and he's going to run up there with a sword and save him. And Yeshua's not coming to this with fear in his mind. He's warned us over and over and over and over and over again, fear not. And those who supposedly are following him that will tell you that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom are insane and don't know anything about what the man taught. And yes, I've had many people, when I point that out after the preacher says fear, and I say, wait a minute, Yeshua said, well, I don't really mean fear. What I mean is have awe for God. It's like, no, you didn't mean have awe for God. You meant exactly what you said, fear. And that's the game. And of course, we can't lead someone to a piece of work we haven't done. So people who are still living and preaching in fear are going to preach fear and intimidation and violation and viciousness and pain and trauma. Course in Miracles talks about the use of words, and it says, hey, the only valid use of words is not to try to explain the truth. You can't do it. The only valid use of words is to invalidate the insanity that people are doing to themselves. There's where the words, and you use the words, the passage in the Course says, you use the words of darkness not because you believe them, but to prove that they're not true. And so fear is the thing that kills virtually everyone. And so this passage from Course in Miracles, the message that crucifixion was intended to teach was that it is not necessary to perceive any form of assault in persecution, because you cannot be persecuted. In other words, if you don't participate, you can't be there. So, can the persecution happen? There are two responses to persecution. One is you continue to live as a human being. You continue to live as love, and therefore you have not been assaulted. But to be assaulted, you've got to hold assault energy, and if someone comes along with persecution, it's your mind that's going to add the assault to it. So again, this is it's such a powerful, the message of the crucifixion. Message it intended to teach what is not necessary to perceive any form of assault in persecution, because you cannot be persecuted. If you respond with anger, you must be equating yourself with the destructible, and are therefore regarding yourself insanely. Now, how many thousands of years, how much of history could we trace the majority of human beings on planet Earth functioning out of fear and hostility? Oh, just about everybody. We have a few who stand head and shoulders and say, we've got a Gandhi here and there, and we've got a Buddha, and we've got a Yeshua. But otherwise, the record is so sadly imbalanced toward hostility and fear that people build in their minds a self out of hostility and fear. And then they equate who they truly are with that self, with the destructible self, with the false self. Yeshua says, in order for you to live, you've got to die. As long as you are equating yourself with the false of being, you're functioning as love. And so if you're equating yourself with the destructible, you're regarding yourself insanely. In other words, we have to wake up to our true identity. We have to wake up to who we are. Hold a newborn child, tap into the essence of the newborn, and notice that the newborn is not loving you, but that the newborn is love. Equate yourself with that. Oh, God, how many messages have to be processed through my mind to clean up all the generations in my bloodline that went, I'm weak, I'm helpless, I'm to blame, I'm guilty, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm a sinner, I'm on. And, of course, the preacher stands up there and gives all the same messages that he or she hasn't resolved in their own lives. And they put those messages into the word of Yeshua, into the mouth of Yeshua, and they're not his words. Fear not is his word. Why would a preacher stand up and rage so that little kids are terrified in listening to the hellfire and damnation? Because the preacher is identified himself with the destructive, with the sinful. And they're railing against themselves, trying to break through their own minds, and they poison millions. So it becomes a matter of waking up, this whole crucifixion. Are you willing to give up that false self, literally to dissolve it? He goes on to say, I've made it perfectly clear that I am just like you, and you are like me, but our fundamental equality can be demonstrated only through joint decision. In other words, are you willing to join with what this awakened human being is? It's interesting, we're in our culture wars. If you've awakened, you are the object of derision. The word woke has become such a political football. And, the whole objective of this work is to wake up from the insanity. So it's one of the most wonderful words in the world. But the non-being mind can take it over and use that as a word of condemnation and derision for those who've awakened to who they are. So Yeshua is inviting us to step up our thoughts, to let loose of the thought disorders based in hostility and fear and false identification of self, You know, somebody says ABC to you, do you go into some sort of rage, some sort of defense, some sort of blame? Then there's your next forgiveness opportunity. And life is here to give us every forgiveness opportunity that we need. And what Yeshua is saying is, I'm inviting you to identify yourself. If you want to be equal with me, because we are equal, we are equals. And much of Christianity put him up on some kind of a pedestal where, no, he's not. But they have to ignore him to do that. He says, the things I do, you can do in greater. But ignore him in order to believe what oftentimes is preached. So he goes on to say, you are free to perceive yourself as persecuted if you choose. When you do choose to react that way, however, you might remember that I was persecuted as the world judges, and I did not share that evaluation for myself. How do you suppose it would have gone if Yeshua had reflected what today so many people in the media and in the world are reflecting? Oh, I'm a victim. Look what you're doing to me. You high priest servant. You Pontius Pilate. You man there with the sword, soldier. You with the cross. Oh, if you hadn't done this to me, I wouldn't be suffering. I mean, there's a really clear difference here. So he says, go ahead, perceive yourself as persecuted if you like. But when you choose to act that way, you might remember that his persecution went beyond what most of the world could even fathom. I was persecuted as the world judges, but I didn't share that evaluation for myself. And here's such a powerful, remembering that we live in an energetic world, and because I did not share it, I did not strengthen it. Remember, a shared idea is strengthened by its sharing. We want to share these ideas of the truth of who we are and allow everything less than that to surface as new levels of vitality and aliveness were reached. New levels of that which needs to be healed are going to show up. But if you join in a particular piece of mind energy, it becomes your physiology, it becomes your flesh. Remember the opening words in the book of John. In the beginning was the mind energy, not the word, the mind energy, and the mind energy became flesh. Join in the mind energy of self-destruction, and surely you'll be destroyed by your own thought. And he goes on to say, I therefore offered a different interpretation of attack. And one, he says, which I want to share with you. If you will believe it, then you will help me teach it. So if you can accept that your true nature is that of love, and your mind and your physiology are designed to be fueled by love, then by receiving that, of course, when you receive it, you're going to get the opportunity. When it lands in your physiology, it's going to splash up everything that's unlike it for healing. But if you let yourself receive it, then you're going to get to process through what is unlike it. You're going to get to forgive those thoughts that respond, that say, no, I truly am a victim. And he's inviting each person to accept that, because by accepting that, that's the mind energy that's strengthened both in the world and in your physiology. And so as you accept that, whatever it is we live, we teach. And the thing to recognize is that nobody even needs to be there to see you teach it in order for it to impact and influence the world. Go back and read the passage in Matthew where Yeshua talks about the Lord's Prayer, and listen to how much he talks there about going into the silence and being in that private space, spoken to another in order to be taught. But energetically, what we join with, we literally teach, we literally bring into the world. And so breathing with you, appreciating you being here with us to share this time. If it impacts you, pass it on. In the meantime, have the best year yet of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to give the world. Blessings. Bye-bye.